My name is Mia Parker. I'm 34 years old and I authenticate ownership records for rare artwork in Santa Fe, which means I make a living finding the truth people try to bury on paper. Every signature tells a story. Every date stamp holds a secret. I've spent years learning to read what forgers try to hide. But on my wedding day, I kept staring at 4 empty chairs and pretending I didn't already know the truth about my own family. Nobody came, not my parents, not my younger sister. 30 minutes before the ceremony, my mother sent a message that said, "Some celebrations force people to take sides. We've made our choice." Then she removed every childhood photograph containing me from the online family album. I learned because my phone kept receiving deletion notifications while I stood in my wedding dress. My fiancé took the phone from my hand before I could read the rest. I married him anyway, surrounded by people who had chosen to show up. The reception went on. I smiled through toasts. I danced. But part of me had already begun calculating what their absence would cost. The next morning at 7:12, my mother texted as though nothing had happened. "I need $8,600 for your sister's wedding deposit. Sent it before noon. Don't embarrass this family again." She added that if I refused, she would tell our relatives my husband had manipulated me into abandoning them. I opened my banking app, transferred $1, and wrote in the memo, "Payment for the seat you left empty." Then I canceled the monthly transfer I had quietly sent my parents for 6 years. 2 weeks later, 3 hard knocks shook our front door. My mother stood outside with 2 police officers and a folder labeled family fraud. She smiled until I opened my own file. Then every trace of color vanished from her face. Before I explain what was inside and why one officer immediately asked my mother to step away from the door, tell me what time is it where you are and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels. The $1 transfer was not an impulsive joke. It was the first honest payment I had ever made to my family. For 6 years, I had sent my parents $1,200 every month through an account my mother called the Parker Family Reserve. She created it after my father's contracting business began losing clients, telling me the money would cover property taxes, medical expenses, and emergencies. I believed her because being useful had always been the closest thing I received to affection. Whenever I questioned a withdrawal, she reminded me that she had fed me, clothed me, and allowed me to attend college. She never mentioned that I earned scholarships, worked nights cataloging museum archives, and repaid every dollar of my student debt myself. My younger sister was never asked to contribute. According to my mother, she was still finding her direction, although she was 29 and had changed wedding themes 3 times in 1 year. The morning after my wedding, my mother did not congratulate me, ask whether I was happy, or explain why the family had stayed away. She demanded $8,600 because my sister wanted a deposit on a glass-roofed desert resort outside Sedona. The venue was apparently available for only 48 hours. My mother attached a screenshot of the payment page and wrote, "You owe her one beautiful day after stealing attention with your little ceremony." I stared at the word "owe" until it lost all meaning. My wedding had consisted of 42 guests in a converted pottery workshop. We served local food, used borrowed wooden tables, and paid for everything ourselves. My mother had called it cheap, yet she expected me to finance a venue costing more than my entire reception. When I refused, she sent 6 more messages from different numbers. First came guilt. Your sister cried all night because of you. Then came revision. We skipped your wedding because your husband's family made us feel unwelcome. That was false. My husband's parents had mailed them handwritten invitations and offered to arrange transportation. Then came the threat. People should know what kind of man isolates a daughter from her family. His employer may be interested. My husband, Owen Brooks, worked as a wildfire mitigation engineer for a regional utility. His reputation mattered because communities trusted his safety assessments. My mother knew a false accusation could damage him, even if it was eventually disproven. That was when my anger became something colder and more useful. I stopped replying and began documenting. At work, I examined forged provenance files by comparing dates, signatures, metadata, bank records, and the small inconsistencies liars overlook. I decided to apply the same method to my family. I downloaded 6 years of statements from the Parker Family Reserve. The account was in my name because my credit had qualified for the best terms, but my mother had authorized access. I expected to see taxes and medical bills. Instead, I found resort deposits, cosmetic procedures, boutique purchases, payments to a wedding planner, and recurring transfers into an account identified only by 4 digits. During the previous 18 months, more than $37,000 had disappeared. The most recent withdrawal was exactly $8,600, taken 3 days before my wedding, and then reversed after insufficient documentation. My mother was not asking me to provide a new wedding deposit. She was asking me to replace money she had already tried to take. That evening, I began a private document titled "The Letter I Will Never Send." I wrote, "Dear Mom, you taught me that records matter only when they protect you. My career taught me records matter most when someone wants them forgotten." I did not send it. Instead, I canceled her access, froze outgoing transfers, changed every password, and notified the bank that future requests required my physical signature. Then I discovered something worse. The contact email attached to the account had been changed 4 months earlier to an address using my name, but I had never created it. Someone had been receiving account notices while pretending to be me. I called the bank's fraud department and learned that a request had recently been submitted to add my sister as a co-owner. The request included a scanned signature that looked like mine from a distance. Up close, the letter M curved in the wrong direction. I had seen that same handwriting on every birthday card my mother ever signed. I realized the $8,600 demand was not the beginning of the scheme. It was the moment the scheme failed. Before bed, I saved everything to 3 locations and told Owen exactly what I had found. He did not tell me to forgive them or calm down. He asked one question: "How far do you think she'll go to keep this hidden?" 2 weeks later, I received my answer at the front door. The officers did not arrive with sirens, handcuffs, or an arrest warrant. They came because my mother had filed a detailed complaint claiming I had seized control of a shared family account, removed money belonging to my parents, and used electronic transfers to intimidate her. On paper, her story sounded more believable than screaming that a $1 payment was harassment. She had brought printed statements, screenshots, and a notarized declaration signed by my father. She told the officers the account contained proceeds from the sale of my grandmother's land, and that I had volunteered to manage those funds because of my financial experience. Almost every sentence was false, but the folder made her lies look organized. That was her real talent. My mother understood that people often confuse paperwork with proof. One officer introduced herself as Officer Elena Ruiz. Her partner remained near the walkway while she explained that no one was under arrest, but they needed clarification regarding ownership of the account and an alleged threat. My mother immediately stepped forward and said she stole from her own family because we wouldn't approve of her marriage. She held up a screenshot of my $1 transfer. The memo was visible beneath it. Look at that! She is taunting me. I asked Officer Ruiz whether she wanted to review the records inside or on the porch. My mother interrupted, saying I was manipulative and trained to fabricate documents. That was when I understood why she had contacted Owen's employer before coming. She wanted to establish a pattern. Unstable daughter, controlling husband, disputed family money. If I became emotional, I would complete the picture for her. I invited the officers into the kitchen while my mother followed without being asked. Owen stood beside the counter, but let me speak. I presented the original account agreement, showing that I opened the account with my salary and remained its sole legal owner. Next came 6 years of direct deposits from my personal checking account. There were no deposits from my parents, no land sale proceeds, and no inheritance transfers. Then I displayed the access authorization granting my mother permission to pay specific household expenses, followed by the bank notice confirming that authorization had been revoked. Officer Ruiz examined the dates. My mother's expression tightened, but she still looked confident. "That doesn't prove the money wasn't ours," she said. "Families don't need contracts for everything." I agreed. Then I opened the transaction report. I had divided the withdrawals into 3 categories. The first contained legitimate expenses I had knowingly covered: property tax, insurance, and 2 medical bills. The second contained questionable personal spending: hotel stays, luxury clothing, a cosmetic clinic, and payments to my sister's wedding planner. The third category contained transfers to the unknown account, ending in 4419. I showed Officer Ruiz an email from the bank confirming that the 4419 account belonged to Diane Parker, my mother, and was not jointly held. My mother said those transfers reimbursed her for expenses. I asked whether she had receipts. She said she had thrown them away. Then I presented the forged co-owner form bearing my copied signature, the fake email address created in my name, and the metadata showing that the document had been uploaded from an internet connection registered to my parents' home. My mother's face lost color. My father, Raymond Parker, had remained in the car until that moment. When Officer Ruiz asked him to come inside, he entered looking less like an angry parent and more like a man who had just realized his signature was attached to something criminal. The officer asked my mother whether she had submitted the form. She said my sister handled the wedding finances and might have made a mistake. Then she claimed my father had done it. My father stared at her and said, "You told me Mia approved it." It was the first crack. My mother recovered quickly and pointed at me. "She gave us that money. Gifts cannot be stolen back." Officer Ruiz explained that revoking future access to an account was not theft. Filing a knowingly false complaint, submitting falsified banking documents, and impersonating an account holder were different matters. My mother's hands began trembling. She demanded that the officers arrest me for emotional abuse. Officer Ruiz asked her to step outside. That should have ended the encounter. But my mother had one final weapon. From her folder, she pulled a printed email allegedly written by me. It said I would destroy my sister's wedding, expose the family, and make sure my mother ended up homeless. The message had been sent from the fake address using my name. My mother assumed it would frighten me because it looked vicious. Instead, it completed the evidence chain. I had already obtained the login history for that email through the bank's fraud inquiry. Every access originated near my parents' address. I handed Officer Ruiz the report. She studied it, looked at my mother through the window, and asked whether I wished to make a formal complaint. I said yes. My mother had arrived expecting the police to pressure me into restoring her access. Instead, she left holding a case number and instructions not to contact me, except through legal counsel. No one handcuffed her that afternoon, but the humiliation was immediate. 2 neighbors watched her argue beside the patrol car while my father stood several feet away, refusing to defend her. Before leaving, Officer Ruiz told me the banking documents might be referred to a financial crimes investigator. My mother heard her. For the first time in my life, she did not look furious with me. She looked afraid of what her own records would say. Yet the most painful revelation came after the officers departed. My father returned alone, placed a sealed envelope on my table, and said, "Your mother isn't the only person who lied to you." Inside was a photograph from 10 years earlier, a canceled check bearing my name, and evidence that my family's betrayal had begun long before the wedding. The canceled check was for $24,000, issued from a trust my grandmother created for me before she died. I had never seen the check, never signed it, and never received the money. According to the endorsement, it had been deposited into my parents' business account during my final year of college. My father sat at the kitchen table with his elbows on his knees and admitted that the trust was supposed to help me open an art restoration studio after graduation. My mother told him I had agreed to lend them the money because their construction business was failing. He said he believed her because she showed him an email carrying my name. Another fake address. Another forged message. They used the money to settle tax debt and pay for my sister's first year at a private design school. When I later asked why my grandmother had left me nothing, my mother said the medical bills had consumed the estate. I believed that too. I wanted my father to tell me he had been deceived completely, but the truth was uglier. He knew the signature on the check did not look right. He knew my grandmother had favored direct conversations over email. He also knew I was working 2 jobs while attending college. He chose not to ask because the money solved his problem. "I told myself we would repay it," he said. "Then the business got worse and your mother said bringing it up would only divide the family." I asked why he signed the police declaration. He looked at the floor. My mother had told him the family account contained repayment for the stolen trust money and that I was now taking it back. He signed without reading the bank statements again. Silence had been easier than truth. That was when my mother returned. She had apparently refused to leave with the officer until she was warned she could be cited for obstructing the conversation. She walked into my kitchen and saw the canceled check on the table. Her eyes moved from my father to me. "You had no right to show her that," she said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Her first concern was control. I opened the letter I had never intended to send and read one sentence aloud. "Every time you called me selfish, you were standing on something you had taken from me." She laughed, but the sound was brittle. She said, Parents make sacrifices children never understand. She claimed the trust money had kept a roof over everyone's head and therefore benefited me. I reminded her that I had already moved into student housing and paid my own rent when they cashed it. She then changed tactics. She said my grandmother had been mentally confused and should never have left me more than my sister. According to her, taking the money had corrected an injustice. Owen asked her to leave. My mother ignored him and turned toward me. She said he was poisoning me against the family, just as my college boyfriend had once tried to do. That sentence stopped me. Years earlier, I dated a photography student named Caleb, who encouraged me to accept an internship in Chicago. A week before I was supposed to leave, he ended the relationship through a brief email saying I was too dependent on my family and he wanted no further contact. I had been devastated and declined the internship. My mother spent months telling me the rejection proved ambitious men would always abandon me. Now listening to her mention him, I noticed the same satisfaction in her voice that I remembered from that summer. I asked how she knew Caleb had objected to my family. His breakup email had never mentioned them. My mother froze. My father looked at her and the silence answered before she did. Years earlier, she had called Caleb pretending to be concerned about my mental health. She told him I had severe debt, unstable moods, and a history of lying. Then she accessed my email, sent the breakup message to herself as evidence, deleted his replies, and convinced me he had disappeared. She did it because the internship would have moved me 2 states away at the exact moment my parents needed someone with good credit to guarantee a business loan. My relationship had not simply failed, my mother had dismantled it to keep me financially available. My father whispered her name like he had never met her before. She turned on him, accusing him of weakness and reminding him that he had enjoyed the money. Then my sister, Haley Parker, called my father's phone. He accidentally answered on speaker. She asked, "Did Mia find the trust check?" The room became completely still. My sister knew. Perhaps not from the beginning, but long enough to anticipate this moment. My mother grabbed the phone and ended the call. I felt something inside me settle. Not break because it had been breaking for years, but settle into its final shape. This was no longer one controlling parent and several confused relatives. Each of them had benefited from my ignorance. I told my mother that every document would go to the bank investigator and my attorney. I would not post accusations online, threaten her, or create a public spectacle. I would simply stop protecting her from the factual consequences of her choices. She said if I exposed the trust, my father could lose his remaining business contracts, and my sister's wedding would collapse. Then perhaps they should know what their comfort cost, I replied. My father asked whether there was anything he could do. I told him truth delivered only after discovery was not courage. It was damage control. As they left, my mother looked back and warned that Haley would never forgive me for ruining her future. The next morning, Haley requested a private meeting. She said she wanted to explain what she knew, but before agreeing, I wondered whether she was coming as my sister or as my mother's final messenger. Haley chose a roadside cafe north of Santa Fe, halfway between our homes and far from anyone who knew our family. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses, although we were seated indoors. Before sitting down, she asked whether I had recorded the conversation. I said, no, but my attorney had advised me to document future contact in writing. She rolled her eyes and said, "That's exactly what Mom means. You're turning a family disagreement into a criminal case." Her first sentence told me she had not come to apologize. She had come to negotiate. Haley began by saying our mother had always been difficult, but I was overreacting because no one had personally profited from the trust money. I reminded her that part of it paid her tuition. She said she was 19 and had not known where the money came from. I believed that part. Then I asked when she learned the truth. She looked toward the window and said, "A few years ago." After several questions, a few years became 4. She had discovered the check while helping our mother scan documents for a mortgage application. She confronted her and our mother, said the money belonged equally to both daughters. Instead of telling me, Haley accepted another $12,000 toward a failed clothing boutique. The funds came from the same hidden account that had received transfers from my family reserve. She said she felt trapped. Our mother had warned that revealing the truth would destroy our father, leave them homeless, and make me hate her. I asked whether she had considered that staying silent might also make me hate her. She cried then, but tears did not erase the timeline. She knew I was sending $1,200 each month. She knew the family skipped my wedding because I had refused to guarantee another loan. She also knew my mother planned to demand that $8,600 the next morning. In fact, the resort deposit had been Haley's idea. She and my mother assumed I would pay because I always did. When I transferred $1 instead, Haley called it cruel. I placed printed statements on the table. They showed 11 payments to her planner, a bridal stylist, and the Sedona resort. "Did you believe this came from Mom's savings?" I asked. She admitted she had stopped asking. Then she used the sentence I had heard throughout childhood. "You make more than the rest of us." I told her income was not consent. Success did not turn theft into sharing. She argued that I had always acted superior because I left home, built a career, and married someone stable. I said she was confusing independence with judgment because our mother had trained us to compete. Every compliment given to one daughter had been used as a weapon against the other. When Haley succeeded, I was called cold and jealous. When I succeeded, Haley was told I thought she was worthless. Our mother did not merely choose a favorite. She kept changing the favorite so neither of us would compare notes. For one moment, Haley's defensiveness softened. She admitted our mother had told relatives I deliberately scheduled my wedding near Haley's engagement party to steal attention, even though Haley chose her date after receiving my invitation. She admitted the family skipped my ceremony to punish me into apologizing. She had wanted to come, but feared losing financial support. That confession hurt more than a direct insult. She had not been prevented from attending. She had calculated the cost of loving me and decided it was too high. Haley then offered a deal. If I withdrew the complaint and restored enough money to secure the resort, she would persuade our mother to acknowledge the trust privately. No police, no lawyers, no extended family. We could start over. I asked whether starting over included repayment. She said repayment was unrealistic. I asked whether it included a public correction to the relatives who had been told my husband isolated me. She said that would humiliate our mother. Everything in the proposed peace protected the people who had harmed me and required sacrifice only from me. I stood and told Haley I loved the sister I remembered, but I could no longer finance the sister she had chosen to become. I would not pay for her wedding, conceal the forged documents, or communicate until she could take responsibility without bargaining. She called me vindictive. I left $20 for the coffee and walked out. That night, I added another paragraph to my unsent letter. I kept thinking my sister and I were prisoners in the same house. Today, I learned she had been given a key and chose not to tell me. 3 days later, Haley forwarded me an invitation to a family meeting. Our mother claimed she possessed proof that would end my marriage, destroy my complaint, and explain why I had never truly belonged in the Parker family. I nearly deleted it. Then I noticed the attachment, a copy of my birth certificate with one line blacked out. The meeting took place at my parents' home on a Sunday afternoon. I agreed to attend only after my attorney advised me that hearing the claim directly might help document further deception. Owen came with me, but we drove separately and parked facing the street. I also notified Officer Ruiz that my mother had resumed contact despite the earlier instruction. I did not expect violence. I expected theater. My mother had arranged chairs in a semicircle, as if she were hosting an intervention. My father sat near the fireplace, looking exhausted. Haley sat beside her fiancé, Grant Mercer, a commercial real estate broker, who had apparently been told only that I was refusing to release family inheritance money. Two of my mother's sisters were present, along with our oldest cousin. Their attendance explained the dramatic birth certificate. My mother wanted witnesses, not reconciliation. She began by saying, I had attacked the family because I resented Haley and had always suffered from identity issues. Then she announced that the man listed on my birth certificate was not my biological father. She claimed she had protected me from this truth for 34 years, and that the trust from my grandmother was never legally mine because I was not part of the Parker bloodline. According to her, taking the money had merely returned it to the rightful family. My father closed his eyes. Haley stared at the carpet. The relatives looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. My mother expected the revelation to destroy me. Instead, it exposed another weakness in her story. The birth certificate listed my father as Raymond Parker. Whether we shared DNA did not change my legal identity, my grandmother signed trust, or the fact that my mother forged my endorsement. I asked whether my grandmother knew about my parentage. My mother said yes. I produced a copy of the trust language obtained through my attorney. It identified me by full legal name, date of birth, and social security number. It also included a handwritten letter from my grandmother stating that the funds were intended specifically for my education and future studio. Blood had never been a condition. My mother had blacked out the attending physician's name on the birth certificate to create the appearance of missing paternal information. The document itself proved nothing except her willingness to manipulate it. Then my father spoke. He said he had ordered a private DNA test years ago after finding old letters. The results showed he was my biological father. My mother had invented the affair story during an argument and later reused it whenever she wanted to frighten him. He had kept the test because he feared confronting her. He placed the report on the table. My mother called it fake. My father replied, "That word doesn't protect you anymore." I turned to Grant and asked whether he knew his wedding deposit was supposed to come from an account funded entirely by me. He said Haley told him her parents had sold investment property. I handed him the transaction summary. Haley tried to stop him from reading it, but he moved his chair away. The room shifted rapidly. My aunts learned that some of the family emergency money my mother borrowed from them had paid for bridal services. My cousin learned our mother had used his address on one of the disputed account forms. Grant learned Haley had known about the forged signature for years. My mother accused me of staging an ambush, although she had invited everyone. Then I presented the final document, an internal review from my father's business. While tracing transfers, the bank discovered that my mother had redirected client retainers, into the same 4,419 account. My father's company had been struggling not only because of lost contracts, but because more than $60,000 had been removed over 3 years. Some money funded Haley's boutique. Some funded personal expenses. Some remained unexplained. My father looked at my mother as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. She said she had moved the funds to protect them from taxes. Grant quietly said that sounded like fraud. She shouted at him to stay out of family matters. My mother demanded that my father choose between his wife and a daughter trying to destroy them. For decades, he had chosen her through silence. This time he stood, removed his wedding ring, and said he would contact an accountant and an attorney. He was not defending me out of sudden bravery. He was finally afraid her actions could cost him his business and freedom. Even so, the choice mattered. My mother turned to Haley. "You know why I did this? Tell them." Haley opened her mouth but could not speak. Grant asked her directly whether she had known the resort deposit would be taken from me. After a long pause, she whispered, "I knew Mia usually paid." Grant removed himself from the semicircle and said the wedding was postponed until he understood the extent of the deception. Haley began crying and blamed me for humiliating her. I told her humiliation came from being exposed, not from the person who revealed the truth. My aunts left with copies of the statements. My cousin said he would correct the story in the family group chat because my mother had told everyone Owen was financially abusing me. My mother's carefully chosen audience had become a group of witnesses against her. Before leaving, I placed my unsent letter on the coffee table. It contained no insults, threats, or demands. It listed what had been taken, what had been falsified, and what boundaries would now exist. No direct contact, no money, no access to my home or workplace. Any future communication had to pass through counsel until the investigation ended. My mother tore the letter in half and said I would regret abandoning my blood. I looked at the room she had emptied one lie at a time and replied, "Blood never required me to disappear, so you could survive." As Owen and I walked outside, Haley followed us. She asked whether there was any way to fix what she had done. I told her apologies were not promises. They were patterns, and hers had not changed yet. The consequences did not arrive in one dramatic explosion. They came through canceled transfers, unanswered calls, legal notices, honest conversations, and the slow collapse of a system that had depended on my silence. The bank completed its investigation first. It confirmed that my signature had been copied onto the co-owner request and that the fake email address had been used to impersonate me. Because I had documented the unauthorized transactions quickly, several recent payments were reversed, including the $8,600 resort charge. The older withdrawals became part of a civil claim. My attorney also reopened the issue of my grandmother's trust. The statute questions were complicated, but the forged endorsement and concealed records gave us grounds to pursue restitution. My mother was not led away in handcuffs, and I will not pretend justice always looks that cinematic. She was interviewed by financial investigators and required to surrender records. The false police complaint weakened every explanation she offered afterward. My father separated from her within a month and moved into a small rental while accountants reviewed the business. Several clients left after learning their retainers had been mishandled. He eventually closed the company, sold equipment, and began negotiating repayment plans. He apologized to me in a 4-page letter. I read it once. I did not answer immediately. His remorse may have been sincere, but sincerity does not restore the years a person surrendered to cowardice. Months later, I agreed to meet him with a therapist present. Rebuilding anything would depend on what he did consistently, not what he said when consequences arrived. Haley's wedding never took place. Grant ended the engagement after discovering additional debts she had hidden from him. At first, she blamed me publicly, posting that her jealous sister had destroyed the family over money. I did not respond with insults or private details. I shared one restrained statement with relatives who had been contacted. I have ended financial support after discovering unauthorized transactions and falsified documents. The matter is being handled through appropriate legal channels. I will not discuss it further. Then I attached the bank's confirmation that I was the sole owner of the account. Facts did what arguments never could. Family members who had condemned me began asking my mother questions. She blocked several of them. Others compared stories and discovered she had borrowed money from them using different emergencies. The image she had guarded for decades collapsed because people finally stopped accepting separate versions of the truth. Without my monthly payments, my mother could not maintain the house, cover her personal loans, and continue funding Haley. The property was sold during the separation. She moved into a smaller apartment and told everyone I had made her homeless. I reminded myself that losing a house she could no longer afford was not the same as being abandoned without shelter. Her health worsened under the stress, but I refused to let illness become another tool of control. When she sent messages claiming chest pain, I contacted emergency services rather than rushing over with money. When the hospital confirmed she was stable, she accused me of cruelty. I had finally learned the difference between providing appropriate help and surrendering my life. For nearly 7 months, Haley and I had no contact. Then she mailed me a letter without requests, excuses, or wedding bills. She wrote that she had started counseling, found full-time administrative work, and moved out of our mother's apartment after realizing she was being pressured to repeat the same lies. She enclosed a repayment schedule for the money from my account that had directly benefited her. The installments were small, but the first payment had already cleared. Most importantly, she did not ask me to withdraw my complaint or forgive her. She wrote, "I kept calling myself a victim because it was easier than admitting I was also benefiting. You were not responsible for saving me from choices I refused to examine." I agreed to meet her in a public place. I did not hug her immediately or tell her everything was forgotten. Forgiveness to me no longer meant restoring access. It meant releasing the need to punish someone while still protecting myself from repetition. I told Haley we could begin with one conversation each month. No financial dependence, no messages carried from our mother, no pressure to perform sisterhood for holidays or family photographs. She accepted those terms. Over time, she began showing change through actions. Whether we will ever become close remains uncertainty, but uncertainty is healthier than a false peace purchased with my silence. My marriage grew stronger after the crisis. Not because Owen rescued me, but because he refused to replace my mother as the person making decisions for me. He stood beside me while I learned to trust my own judgment. We converted part of our home into a small research studio, something I once believed my grandmother's trust would create for me. I funded it myself with money that no longer disappeared into emergencies invented by other people. Above my desk, I framed the only page from my unsent letter that my mother had not torn. It reads, I forgive myself for confusing endurance with love. That is the lesson I carried away. Blood is not permission. A shared name, history, or childhood does not entitle anyone to your income, your marriage, your reputation, or your peace. Real family does not demand that one person shrink so everyone else can remain comfortable. Real family respects boundaries even when those boundaries are inconvenient. Walking away from toxic relatives is not always revenge, and it is not automatically cruelty. Sometimes it is the first honest act of self-respect in a life built around obligation. My mother lost control because I stopped arguing with her version of events and started preserving evidence. My father lost his marriage and business because silence eventually became participation. Haley lost her engagement because love could not survive financial deception. And I lost the fantasy that one perfect sacrifice would finally make my family value me. Of all those losses, mine was the only one that set me free. I did not forgive my mother in the way she demanded. I did not restore contact, send money, or pretend the past was a misunderstanding. I forgave myself for taking so long to leave. Sometimes healing begins not when the person who hurt you apologizes, but when you accept that you no longer need their permission to live differently. Some doors close forever, some wounds don't heal, but freedom begins when you finally stop asking for what they could never give. So tell me honestly, if your family skipped your wedding, demanded thousands of dollars the next morning, and then used the police to frighten you into obedience, would you have sent the dollar, or would you have cut them off before they ever reached your door?